dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle. And let's begin exploring the wine glass. Happy October. You know what that means. All the pumpkin spice you can ever want. But more importantly, it's Merlot Me month. Today I'm sitting down with Nick Goldschmidt of Goldschmidt Vineyards. Originally from New Zealand, Nick has worked in Australia and South America, but calls his home Sonoma, California. His devotion to Merlot is epic, and I absolutely loved getting geeky with him over it. I know you are going to enjoy this conversation. If you listen to a lot of podcasts, you know that many ask for Patreon. We do not plan on doing this, but we do ask for your support by leaving a review. It only takes a few seconds of your time, but means so much to the show. The next best way to support Exploring the Wine Glass is to tell your friends. If you enjoy the podcast, your wine-loving friends will too. Finally, don't forget to head to the website, exploringthewineglass.com, to read the blog and sign up for the newsletter so you can keep up with all things happening. Sláinte!
Never let you go.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, Spanish wine scholar, sommelier service, champagne and Côte d'Aron specialist, and a WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. Stay in the know about all things wine by visiting my website, exploringthewineglass.com. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
Special, very, very special. You are so.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Gersina Wines. We are back here talking more Merlot and some special extra bonus wine. And I am here with Nick Goldschmidt of Goldschmidt Vineyards. And I honestly have to say, it's like Goldschmidt Vineyards, Fidelity, Chelsea, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, because you are one busy man.
Well, I guess I don't know. I call myself pretty focused, really. I know it sounds kind of weird, but I think, like I spent 25 years in the corporate world. I was a winemaker at Simi for 14 years, and during that time, run by Louis Vuitton, and then we got sold and purchased by Constellation. So I was a head winemaker for still wines for Louis Vuitton, so Cloudy Bay, Cape Mintel, Rufino, Terraces, and Roses in Portugal. So when I was 27, and then Constellation, I was a head winemaker for Icon Estates. Now, Icon Estates was much smaller, than Constellation is today. And then I finally left Simi and went to the biggest company in the world called AUDIBLE, and we had 150 wineries in 7 countries. And then we got sold to Jim Beam, and we had more wineries, etc. Anyway, in 2008, we got sold to Constellation. I went out on my own, and my idea was, and if you remember, the economy in 2008 was not the healthiest economy. A lot of individual growers that I'd been working with who I'd got to know really well over the years, their families, their wives, their kids, and everything, were being let go by all the people that I used to work for. So I decided that, I had the route to market. I knew who all the distributors were, and I knew the growers. And all I had to do was put the thing in the middle, Well, obviously I had no money, but I had friends. Okay. So that's why we have a lot of different wines, Laurie, because each one of them is a story, and each one of these people is an individual, and it's becoming, it's changing even more now, because I read an article recently where 80% of the land in Napa Valley is owned by wineries, and only 20% of the land in Sonoma County is owned by wineries. So you can imagine in Sonoma County, there's a lot of small family growers, but I can tell you the landscape is changing very quickly here, because it's getting harder and harder to grow grapes, sell the grapes, make the wine, etc., and take a profit at each point. So what's happening is we're becoming more vertically integrated. And so unfortunately, a lot of land is being taken up by some of these larger companies who are trying to control their costs. And we're becoming, as I said, we only have to look at Europe to see what the future of California is, and it's either farm to gate or negociant, and right. That's where we seem to be heading. So preserving small family businesses for me is really, really important, and that's why we have a lot of different wines.
Yeah. And you, but you travel a lot. So, right. Well, let's back up a little and let's get a little bit into you. So you actually originally are from New Zealand, correct?
Correct. But I've
Okay.
lived more than half my life outside of New Zealand.
All right. And when you were in New Zealand, did that play a role in the love of wine, or did that happen after you left New Zealand?
No, after sort of, well, in New Zealand, I wanted to be an engineer like my father, my brother, my sister, blah blah blah. And then I so did that for a while, and then I did horticulture. I really
Oh,
wanted to. It's a long, New Zealand has free education, free medical, and free retirement. If you don't pursue your career, then you have to work for the government. So I ended up in a research plant at another university called Lincoln, and I fell in love with row crops, onions, garlic, carrot, and I thought that's what it was going to be. And then I discovered grapes. I
uh-oh.
thought, oh
A
my
whole other
god,
type of row.
yeah, man, this stuff's way more fun. So then I went to Australia and did a degree in viticulture in Wagga Wagga, which is they built the wine university between New South Wales and Victoria. And then I did a postgraduate in enology at Roseworthy in Adelaide. And then that sort of really got me into wine. And then I went back to New Zealand briefly before I came to California. Yeah.
And how did you find your way to California?
Well, I wanted to. I was a winemaker at Babbage Wines in New Zealand at the time, and I told Joe Babbage, I said, I want 18 months off. I want to do a vintage in California, Chile, and in Europe. He goes, oh, I'm never going to see you again. So, no, I'm coming back. Well, he was right. But I did the California vintage, and it was so funny. I applied. Some of my friends told me this afterwards. I'd forgotten. I applied to do an internship at SEMI in 1989, and they turned me down.
uh,
And by 1990, I was the winemaker.
Quaker.
So it's pretty funny. So in
Na
1989,
na
I
na
ended
na
up.
na na.
No, well, I don't. Well, I was stupid enough. I didn't realize I'd forgotten. But I got a job with a little winery called Carneros Creek, and that was obviously 89 was the year of the earthquake, and so everyone remembers it. And then I went down to Chile in 1990 for the first time, and I've always had, and I think LVMH really, man, I can't say enough. I love the corporate world. Don't get me wrong; they treated me really well. LVMH gave me this opportunity to sort of blend for the US and Canadian palate. I mean, going to Cloudy Bay and making blends, and I'm 27, or Greenpoint in Australia, but the big one was Terrazas in Argentina. So they didn't have a winemaker because it was a champagne house. Chandon was a champagne house, and so I made the first 6, 7 vintages of Terrazas, Malbec, and they sort of LVMH sort of trained me to be a
Yeah.
consultant. And also I had the ability. I worked with a very famous consultant called Michel Roland, who probably today is probably the most famous consultant. And I worked with him for 12 years because he came to see me for 12 years. And through Michel Roland and through LVMH, they gave me that piece. So today I consult for about 20 wineries in 6 countries around the world. And so I've continued to travel in that regard. And let's face it, man, all I do is I show up, I drink wine, I eat with them, give them a couple of critiques, and, but, we just scored our 13th 100-point wine
I
last
know. I
week.
saw that.
So,
I
yeah, no, it's
saw.
been so sudden, it's been quite cool. I never thought I'd get one 100-point wine, let alone 13. But I thought
What does
getting,
what does that sorry to sidebar, but like when I think about like every time the email comes and there's a score, I like open my email like and then yay, but when you open that and you get told or you physically get told 100, like is that a moment I remember where I was when I got my you know
yeah, I remember where I was when I got the first one, and now I'm like, I was telling someone earlier this morning that getting the first one was actually relatively easy. Getting the second one, I mean, because now the expectations are really high,
oh
and
right.
and if you don't perform again, then yeah, it's and the latest ones obviously were 2021 vintage from Chile, and 2021 around the world was probably one of the best vintages, except for New Zealand. every other 2021 country was pretty good.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
congratulations. And sidebar, because it's not Merlot, but sidebar, it sounds like it's a good timing to bring this in. So this is your Fidelity Zinfandel, and this just was in Wine Spectator as Wine of the Week. So, I mean, that's another wow moment. That's like kudos.
Yeah, it's a really interesting project. It was Fidelity is it started again because of a family member. So his name was Al Delormier. Al and Sandy, unfortunately, have both passed away, and I work with their children now. But Al called me up and said he was in serious problem. He'd been selling grapes to see me for a long time. He had sold the winery because he had a small winery to a person, and he had a contract for the grapes for 3 years to sell the winery, but he hadn't been paid for the grapes. So I went up to the winery and I tasted the 3 vintages. I think it was 99, 2000, 2001. I knew the winemaker, really cool guy, and he had all 5 Bordeaux varietals for each of those vintages. And they tasted good. So I said, let's just put them all together. We made, one for each vintage. So we had 3 wines. I called up a master of wine. I won't mention his name, who was the buyer for a small little company called Walmart, Sam's Club. And I said, dude, I've got this great idea, because you know what winemakers are like, we're also really genius in marketing, right? So I came up with this idea. Let's call it Fidelity. We'll launch it on Valentine's Day, put a big heart on the label. Well, you can imagine what happened, right? Sales went like, so the guy calls me back up and says, Nick, I can't sell the last 500 cases. I'm like, dude, I still haven't come out of the closet. I still work for LVMH. So I called up a distributor in New Jersey and Massachusetts and Indiana, and they agreed to take the 500 cases or whatever it was. Anyway, next day, 92 points, best buy wine enthusiast. The buyer calls me back and says, going to get my wine back.
Nope.
So today on the label has a broken heart. So the broken heart represents all the large conglomerations of retail, etc., who have messed up the small family entrepreneurial fun business that we all know and love. But so there's infinite, and everything I do is single vineyard, single varietal, single vintage, and they're all vegan, except for Fidelity. I blend. So this wine is 100% from my own vineyard. It's called Railway, and it's called the rail. You can see that the name of the vineyard is called the Railway for 2 reasons. There is a railway line that runs through the back of the property, and also Railway was a sarcastic name for a big rugby stadium in Wellington in New Zealand, which was imploded. It was a fantastic stadium, but it was built down at the rail yard and it was taking up space, so they blew it up. Now it's called the Cake Tin. I don't want to call a wine the Cake Tin, but so we purchased this vineyard about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. It's a pretty good, for a small guy like me, it's a pretty big chunk. It's 20 acres, and it's just north of Guysville, facing east. Okay. East is important because it's morning sun. But Zinfandel is relatively hard to get ripe in a cooler location. Most Zinfandel is dry farmed, facing west. You cook the grape, but I don't like that high alcohol. The key thing for Zinfandel is, can you have 2 glasses without falling over? And so I bought this property, and there was the fruit was going to a very famous Zinfandel vineyard locally. You probably know the name of it. And he calls me up and goes, Nick, do you know what you bought? I said, no. He goes, well, you bought my single vineyard Petite Syrah and the base of my reserves in. I said, well, I was going to rip it out and put cab. So I kept the vineyard in, and I wrote a contract, and I said, you can only get 2 passes and whatever. And he called me back, I want a 3rd pass, meaning leaf drop, crop drop or something.
Right.
And I went, dude, tore the contract up. I made the wine. So this is it. And it's gone on to gun. I mean, I can't believe, we're a Cabernet Merlot house, but how much Zinfandel we're suddenly selling. And I think it's totally the vineyard. I mean, it's I'm a regenerative farmer. Organics to me is not great, because you can still use discs, and you can still use pyrethrins, which is that's organic, but it's the world's most toxic
Right.
insecticide because it comes from chrysanthemums and gibberellic acid and all that. So to me, not using a disc is really important. So not having brown earth, because whenever you see brown earth, you're releasing 80% of the carbon, which is what we want in the ground.
Right.
So yeah, at the age of the vineyard, the Petit just adds that little bit of spicy backbone, and it's a lot the way I think of with Petit Verdot going into Bordeaux blends. It's that same character, because there's such big varieties. I mean, they give all this sort of structure and this weight on the finish, and that's what Petit Syrah brings to Zin.
Very nice, very nice. And I do love Petit Syrah too. Petit Verdot. I love Petit Verdot. It's another underrated grape variety in my eyes.
Absolutely, but Petit Syrah, man, can be exhausting for me. It has to be really fresh and young for me to drink a Petit Syrah on its own. But Petit Verdot, I agree, very underrated. Cab Franc seems to be the one. Malbec's had its day. Cab Franc's having its day. Petit Verdot is the one that's missed out thus far. But I still think of the five, if I had to say what is the most complete Bordeaux varietal, it's Merlot.
All right.
I think
that's
Pomerol
awesome.
is
there you go. You just took the words out of my mouth. What about it, Pomerol, do you love so much? Like what brings that to be the place?
Well, I think, firstly, you have to learn about the soil, and because Merlot is a bigger berry than Cabernet, so if you're in heat or stress and you dehydrate that berry 10%, that's a huge change for Merlot. So all you're doing is concentrating sugar, acid, and tannin. When you dehydrate Cabernet, which weighs only 0.9 grams, 10%, it's not that big a change. But Merlot weighing 1.2 grams, it's a big, big change. So what you need is water holding capacity. Where do you get water? You get it from clay soil. So whenever I see stones, I always ask where the clay is. And that really is the secret of the water holding capacity is really the secret of Pomerol. And, Haut-Brion is actually not that bad a wine. Petrus is not that bad a wine. They're all from Pomerol. And people don't realize it. Oh my God. Whatever. You can give it away.
Can you go back to your statement where you see stones? You ask where the clay is. What's that relationship?
Because the stones, because it's usually river wash or alluvial wash, but primarily alluvial. Europe is a really old place when it comes to soils. I mean, so the soils are more weathered than what we have here primarily. So the reason why I brought up the two relations is because when you talk about weathering, it's mainly alluvial, but when you're here in Alexander Valley, it's mainly river. So where we grow the Merlot, the two vineyards I grow Merlot on, that I own two vineyards that have Merlot. The gravel sits over the clay, and that's because the river, at some point, the Russian River brought the stones over, and just creates this layer and layer and layer. We're talking hundreds of years, and then the clay is still there. But so what we do now, it's really interesting. I'd always thought about this, but now I'm really practicing it, is finding it. Firstly, I've got to find out where the clay is, how deep it is. Right. And then I'm going to irrigate to the clay, because what happens is the water goes down to the clay and then it goes horizontally across. So when the vines grow, they do the same thing too. They go down to the clay. When we plant a vineyard, we rip it. So we break the clay up a little bit so the roots can go into the clay. But primarily the roots are there. So we have to figure out how deep the clay is, and then we irrigate down to the clay. And so instead of doing short irrigations like we do with Cabernet, we do long irrigations. So we'll irrigate for 5 to 6 hours to make sure the water gets all down there. But we only do it once a week or every 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Whereas with Cabernet, you do it, 3 hours a day, every 2 or 3 days kind of thing.
Okay. And then, so when the roots go down into the clay, so most vines don't like wet feet. So does Merlot like it? Merlot likes a little bit more wet because the clay is going to hold on to that water.
Yeah, it's well, there's two points that you just brought up. The first one is that it's not like wet. I
Right,
mean,
it's not puddles, right?
it's humid. You know, it's
Okay.
this gentle release of water over the week. The second thing is that we're using rootstocks. I mean, it's not Merlot that's going down to the ground. It's going
Oh,
down to
true.
rootstocks. The rootstock that's going down to the clay. And for me, I'm using primarily a rootstock called 110R. 110R is rupestris. Sorry, it's Riparia, not rupestris. It's Riparia, and it's a very deep, very good drought tolerant rootstock. The other one is 3309 and 1103 Paulson. Sorry, 1103 Paulson, 3309, and 110R. They're the three we're using, but they vary in speed. So Paulson is a much quicker grower than Riparia or rupestris. So there's two forms of Vitis. You know, there's Vitis vinifera, which is Cab Chard Merlot, and there's Vitis labrasca, which is the rootstock, and they're rupestris, Rolanda Airy, and whatever the other one is. So all the rootstocks come from that. But many of them are not deep enough. I mean, the original rootstock we were using was 10114, which is more horizontal because people were just irrigating quickly. But now we want to have the drought-tolerant rootstocks, and that's true for almost every country.
And then, so when we talk about Merlot, how did you fall in love with Merlot?
I worked with Michel Alon, and he's from Pomerol.
Okay. Well, not everybody has that. Everybody, that is true. That is true. But not everybody has that beautiful. I guess that's it. That that was a softball toss to you. That was true.
It was. Well, the way I describe it is, I mean, Cabernet, I'm being really generic here, but Cabernet, when you think about the tannins of Cabernet, they're more vertical. They're bright, usually with good acidity, nice spice. You know, because Cabernet is, you know, the greenest, most spicy variety in the world is Carmenere, then Sauvignon Blanc, and then Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, that's why it has, I mean, people that go, I don't like green wine. Well, don't drink Cab, drink Merlot, because Cabernet should be green. It should be spicy. But Merlot is more horizontal. I find that tannins richer, more elegant, softer. It's, you know, and it's a little bit more user-friendly. I know, obviously, we all learned a lot of things during COVID. I mean, I had nine people in my bubble because I had 5 kids, and we drank 1,500 bottles of wine in 18 months or whatever it was. But it's a true story. I really
and that was only when you first started counting.
Yeah. Well, the first month of COVID was funny because I'd come out. Tonight we're starting with Champagne, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Merlot, Cab, whatever. You know, after a month of this, the kids are just like, bring the wine out. We'll choose which way we want it, or which way we want to drink it. And that's where I started to realize what the BS that I'd been saying for so long was actually true. And the fact that now I'm going to discuss Alexander Valley versus Napa, and this is true for Merlot as well. But Alexander Valley, going back to that vertical tannin thing, Alexander Valley is even more vertical than Napa because Napa has sugar. So in the Alexander Valley, we have more red fruit. So it's sort of red cherry, blueberry, black cherry, if you can imagine. And then the wine is a bit more on the structural side. So during dinner, the kids were always drinking those wines because your mouth gets perked up. It's a little bit more alive and fresh. And then they drink the Napa wines with the cheese course at the end of the dinner because the cheese is more salty. And Napa Cab has always got more alcohol and more fructose. You know, there's 2 forms of sugar, glucose and fructose. Fructose is very hard to ferment, but when you have high alcohol, the yeast die at about 14.5 alcohol, so you always end up with more fructose anyway. So you have a more sweet version. So that, again, takes Cabernet a little bit more on the horizontal side, and it goes blueberry this time, black cherry, plum. So you're getting darker fruits and more texture, whereas Alexander Valley is redder and more structural. So my idea is to try and make them more even. And one way you can do that is with Merlot, because Merlot can give you a little bit more black fruit. It can give you more of the texture elements that, not necessarily the sugar, but can give you more of the texture, more of the weight. And that's why I find Merlot really interesting. Cool. Is that a quick answer?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was fantastic. Right. So Merlot actually, they say, was translated into little black bird, right? And so there's controversy of to whether or not it's the birds that eat it or the berry itself. But the berry is actually larger than a Cab Sauv, which is what you said, correct?
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
like, what does that berry like? Let's talk about the cluster. Can we go a little geeky? Can we go a little more geeky, I guess? What does that cluster look like if you're somebody's walking in a vineyard and you're walking in the vineyard and you see a Merlot bunch that you go, whoa, that's a beautiful bunch right there. What does that bunch look like? Is it a larger, that you said the berries are larger, but is the bunch itself larger? Is it a tight cluster? Is it a large cluster? Shoulders? What are you looking for?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, Merlot is a much bigger, it's a longer cluster than Cabernet, and it's tighter. So I don't know if I can show you this, but this is that's Merlot.
Okay.
So
That's a pretty tight cluster and very
it's a pretty tight cluster, yeah.
conical.
And so
Conical, right? Is that the right?
Yeah, and so it doesn't have it has a small wing on it, so you get the main cluster and the wing, whereas Cabernet, the wing can be bigger. But because the Merlot is a bigger berry, it expands and they touch each other, whereas Cabernet generally can be a lot looser than that. And the advantage of that is you get more air and more evenness of light penetration on the cluster. I don't think I have a really good one of Cabernet, but
so the Merlot being so tight, is it prone to mildew? Is it like, what are some problems that you might have in the vineyard? Because if the cluster is a little bit looser, then the wind is going to go through, the berries. Oh yeah, that's a lot more space and kind of bigger up on top. So
no,
if the clusters are tight, botrytis, right? Because what's inside, what if it gets wet inside, and then
rots. But the main that's a bit geeky. But the main difference, if you think about it, is
geekiness.
The main difference is that, Merlot is this big and Cabernet is this big. So you can imagine the skin to pulp ratio here is lower than it is there. So
color.
How do you the thing is, how do you concentrate a Merlot berry when it has more juice? Whereas Cabernet, you don't need to, because the skin to pulp ratio is relatively high. And that's important because the skin has all the polyphenols and I mean, it's where all the tannin is, the color and the flavor is all there in the skin. So if you have a bigger berry, then you have more juiciness to the wine. So what some people do is they bleed, and that's where bleeding comes in. They'll take 10% of the juice out on day 2 or 3, and basically what you're doing is you're decreasing your skin to pulp ratio and making it more like a Cabernet. Whereas for me, I don't think like that. I think
thank you.
That's part of
that's Merlot, right? I mean,
it's Merlot. Yeah.
If I want to drink Merlot, it brings me back to like the kind of the new thing of let's age wine in bourbon barrels or whatever. And I'm like, if I want to drink bourbon, then I'm going to drink bourbon. If I want to drink wine, I want to drink wine. I don't want to drink wine that tastes like bourbon, and I don't want to drink bourbon that tastes like wine. So if I want a Merlot, which I love Merlot, I don't want it tasting like a Cab. I don't, right?
Yeah,
I want it to be Merlot.
And I find that fun. I mean, bourbon barrels are like making barrels for bourbon producers is like, it takes them a couple of weeks. Making a barrel for a winemaker takes 3 years. Right. So,
that's probably the real reason behind it. That's probably the real reason behind why they're aging in bourbon barrels, not.
Well, let's keep it between ourselves.
That's good marketing right there.
Yeah, no, very much. But yeah, Merlot, and so we sent you 2 Merlots. The first one again is a Fidelity, and I sent you that one because I wanted to show you. This is a 5. The 5 Bordeaux varietals, Merlot and Cab being the obvious 2, and then Malbec, Petit Verdot, and Cab Franc. So each one of them sort of it goes against what I normally argue. I normally argue that I can if you give me one Cabernet vineyard, I can make it very complex by changing the way I harvest, changing the way I put the shoots, and then change the way I make the winemaking. And I generally sort of talk about 3 wines that I like to make, and I can make 3 wines from one vineyard. What you do when you're blending, though, is basically you're throwing that out the window, and what you're making, the way you make the blend is you're talking about what each varietal is bringing to the palate. So we know that Merlot gives the sweet, ripe, red cherry character right up on front of the tongue, what we call elegant. Cabernet gives you the power and the rich in the middle of the tongue. And then the Petit Verdot gives you the structure and the finish. And then the other 2 varietals, Malbec gives color. So Malbec is the blackest of the 5. And then Cab Franc gives that aromatic. It also gives a little bit more of spice, sort of like a salty character that Cab Franc. Cab Franc's probably the hardest to grow correctly because Cab Franc is hard to ripen if it's overcropped, and too many people overcrop Cab Franc. So, last night I was at a tasting and there was a lot of Cab Francs. They were all very, very weak, I thought.
I don't like hearing that.
Yeah, dilution. I think we're industry wide. We're on to make a single vineyard Cab Franc. I think we're a long way away from making great Cab Francs, but it'll happen. But in the meantime, this wine, the Fidelity Red Blend, is very successful for us. It's our second best-selling wine, and I really put emphasis on the Cabernet and Merlot making up 85%, and then the other 15% is made up from the other 3 varietals.
And so, when you're picking Merlot from your vineyard, what are you actually looking for? So there, people always talk about art and science and whatever, and they go hand in hand in some, they go hand in hand, but you're combining, I'm assuming you're combining some of the chemistry that goes along with it, along with you physically being in that vineyard and knowing what that vineyard is is best when it's best. But is there are you generally looking at a range of bricks? Are you looking at a range of other aspects of it, that pH, the acid, and then you hone it in on your palate?
And now, a word from our sponsor. Exploring the Wine Glass is brought to you by Dracaena Wines. Dracaena Wines is an artisan winery located in Paso Robles, California. They have been producing wine since 2013. Their first vintage began with 1 wine, their classic Cabernet Franc, which received a 91 in Wine Enthusiast. Since then, they have increased production as well as expanded their portfolio, have received many accolades including multiple double gold medals and consistent 90+ ratings. Visit their website www.dracaenawines.com or use the link in the show notes to schedule a private tasting and to see their entire portfolio. Purchase your award-winning wine and let Dracaena Wines help turn your moments into great memories.
Well, I think 2 things. I'll answer the first piece first about the history is really important. And having made wine in these vineyards, most of these vineyards, the Merlot that has been going into Fidelity, I've been on that vineyard for 25 years. And I thought it was funny that, the Wine Enthusiast came out and said, these are the 40 best winemakers under 40 years old. I'm like, dude, when Kim Jong-un drops a nuclear bomb, we all run to the bunker, then they're the ones I'm not taking. Because nobody knows how long they're going to last, and you ask these young winemakers, like, dude, how long is your wine going to last? 25 years. I'm like, oh, okay, show me. I'm down that bunker for 15 years. I want to know for sure that their wine's going to last.
That I'm taking the right wine.
Yeah. All right, to answer the second part of the question is the way grapes ripen. I don't know if you can see this, but
yep, I can.
This is acidity, and then this is veraison.
Okay.
When the berries change, and then we start to get an increase in sugar, bricks, and then flavor.
Right.
Flavor starts off relatively low and increases to get closer to harvest, and then tannins go from green to dusty to dry to ripe. And that's really the key thing, is like making sure that you're at that ripe stage. And it's quite different between Cabernet, and I don't know where the sun's coming from.
It's following you.
Yeah, I know. And it's quite different for Cabernet. So Merlot can trick your mouth because you get a sweetness to Merlot
Okay.
because it's not as tannic. And so the tannin volume generally is a little bit less. So you have to be very careful that you do not get tricked into thinking that the grape is ripe from a sugar standpoint, because you're really waiting for that tannin. And once you know, I mean, it's relatively easy. But with Cabernet, it's much more obvious. It's much easier to make a picking decision on Cabernet because it's more even, and the tannins are drier. So as soon as you know the tannins are less dry, then you go ahead and pick it. But with Merlot, you really have to watch that you're not getting seduced by the juiciness, you know.
Right. And then is there a specific way you're trellising, or are they all trellised?
Yeah, Merlot, yes. I mean, because the oldest Merlot vineyard I work on in California is 1989, because that's pretty much when everything was replanted due to phylloxera. And so when in the early 90s, traditionally, we were going back to vertical shoot positioning and VSP, which is pretty much what people use. So I know this is unusual, but a lot of growers don't realize there's a verb in VSP. It's called positioning. And so you have to get the shoots straight. And to do that, you have to use clips. And, you know, that's very time consuming. So to make Icon Merlot, you really need true VSP. You need to be 10% off north-south. You need to be on a clay soil. You need to be facing east. I mean, these are all the checks, you know.
Right.
So, and then when we bring it into the winery, we know that Merlot is going to have more fruit than tannin. So we can be a little bit more aggressive on the extraction than we could be with Cabernet. So Cabernet, I certainly make the wines different. With Cabernet, I'm almost more like a soaker than I am a extractor. Whereas with Merlot, I'm more of an extractor.
Okay. And then is there any truth to that you want the vines to, they talk about trailing leaf work, like we see a lot of Merlot vineyards where the leaves are falling over. Do you follow that? Do you know, like it's like trailing leaves? There's like a lot of times you see other, the vineyards where they're very well maintained, but a lot of Merlot vineyards, when you go through them, the leaves are kind of let to go, like they're allowing it to go vigorous in the green aspect.
Sounds like a lazy vineyard.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Sounds like lazy people. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Certainly not the way I'd grow it. I think you're right, though. I think that with the climate change that we were having, that people are trying to get more shade onto the cluster, because Merlot is an early ripener to versus Cabernet, so it's going to be more subjected to the heat in July and August versus Cabernet, which is going to be more like September. So, yeah, I could see that, but I'm not really a big fan of that. I would rather, that because what you're doing is you're trying to change the terroir. The terroir. People talk about terroir and they think it's this way or that way, but for me, terroir is really based on human elements, because by allowing the canopy to grow bigger, you're changing the terroir. You pick on a Wednesday, I pick on a Thursday. We just changed the terroir. You had a power cut. My truck got stuck in the heat. That changed the terroir. And then you irrigate it. If you irrigate, you just removed all the terroir. That's a whole other ball
game.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've noticed when I was in Italy, I was in Rioja and Ribera del Duero, I couldn't believe how much irrigation is being put in now, because these guys, they're not going to be able to survive with the heat, with the climate change.
Right. And in terms of ripening and everything, so it's Merlot would come of the Bordeaux varieties. Is Merlot one of the earliest ones?
Of the Bordeaux, yes. Merlot would be the earliest. I mean, that's of what we've picked so far. I've only picked Merlot.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I picked the Merlot for the Fidelity Red Blend yesterday. So
so you're a busy man you've been a very, very busy man these.
No.
Well,
It's only one vineyard. We're actually going to pick Merlot and Napa on Monday. So that'll be because Napa is generally warmer
okay.
in the Alexander Valley. And that's why Alexander Valley, I think, is more interesting, because you get to hold the red fruit character for longer with a little bit more acidity. So that's why I find Alexander Valley a bit more interesting than Napa.
Okay. Well, with that as a segue, let's talk about this Harold 100% Merlot. So this is what I have in my glass. So this is a 2021 Merlot from Alexander Valley. So tell me about this wine while I get to swirl and sip, because for me it's officially afternoon, so we're good.
You East Coaster.
At least for these 5 days, I'm an East Coaster.
Right. So our primary Merlot is Chelsea. So she's my oldest daughter. And we started making, for a father to have a project with your daughter is like a huge thrill, because between the ages of 13 and 20, girls don't normally talk to their fathers. But if you have a project together, you have to. And so when she was 2, I traced her in her head. She colored it in. That's where the label comes from. And this wine has become.
I'm sorry to interrupt. She chose that color, right?
Well, she's a redhead. And she's redhead.
I thought I read that you came up with the silhouette idea and let them choose what color was the background.
Well, no, on Chelsea, I traced her in the head. She colored it in. The other girls, the Catherine and the Hillary, they're afterthoughts. Whatever. But so with the success of Chelsea's been really successful. We decided I had another really good Merlot producer that I wanted to also celebrate. And so Herald means, proclamation or in fact, it's the name of the newspaper in Auckland, in New Zealand, where I'm from. It's called the New Zealand Herald. And so it's this news that, hey, guess what? Merlot is not completely bad.
We have a Herald here in Bergen County, New Jersey, also.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
I need it. You take a Herald next to the Herald, drinking the Herald. So really unique grower. I've been working with Steve now for, not Steve. Steve's the third owner of the same property, but he's owned it for about 15 years. And so making Merlot from his vineyard, it's killer vineyard. Beautiful. A lot of red, lush.
Yeah.
Black cherries, but it also has
plum. Chocolate, plum,
chocolate.
Okay.
Yeah, plum, black plum. I find it goes back to that sort of vertical and horizontal thing I was talking about before. Like when you think of Merlot from the Alexander Valley, it's not like Cabernet at all. I mean, it has a lot more richness and elegance and sweetness, and so that black fruit. It's almost like a. I hate to say this, but it's more like a Napa Cabernet of Alexander Valley, but it's Merlot. So the Merlot is giving you that Napa sweetness without the alcohol. So yeah, both Chelsea and Herald sort of made in that vein. Really great vineyards, a little bit of clay, as I said, and but at the same time, I don't want to push. I don't want to push the alcohol. I don't want to have this big American. I joke. Americans were trained on peanut butter, Coca-Cola, Napa Cab. Okay, because it's sugar, right? And so, we want to emphasize the fruit rather than faking out the wine by making these big, heavy Napa wines. There's minerality in this. Austerity is a strong word, but sort of that vibrancy that you get. Damn, I'm hungry or thirsty. I want to go back and have that second glass. And that's what you should also get in this sort of sweetness from fruit-driven wines rather than sugar-driven wines.
I don't know if you noticed, I poured myself more.
Oh, well, it is 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it is really first of all, the color is beautiful. It's a nice bright ruby. It's nice and clear, like it's you can see through it. I can sort of see my writing below it. But the aromatics, I'm getting that red, that like a raspberry. I do get plum. I don't know if you agreed with the chocolate or not, but I do. I guess some chocolate. I guess some chocolate on it. But on the palate, it is bright. It is like, hello, here I am. And the tan, yeah, right. And the tannins are so luxurious. They're there, and they just carry that flavor all the way through to the end. So
yeah, I don't know.
I have to pull myself more.
I always no, I agree with the chocolate comment, but it's a cocoa comment rather than
Powder, like it's not like a
rather than,
chocolate bar. Yeah,
because people
it's a
always go,
cocoa.
oh, I
Yeah.
drink my Cabernet with dessert. I'm like, well, as long as
Oh,
it's
no.
unsweetened chocolate,
Yeah,
not
yeah. No,
sweetened
you are
chocolate.
correct. It's more of a cocoa powder, it's not a chocolate bar.
Right. But I agree with, absolutely.
Yeah.
But when I'm a huge, we do a lot. And during the summer, all we do is because we have big families, so we always have barbecues and everyone just shows up. It's like, because all my kids live around me. But Saturdays
And
and
you have
Sundays
the
always come
wine.
over. And they have, but we, predominantly they all want to drink Merlot because it goes much easier because we're all, obviously we live in a special place in California and a lot of fresh vegetables and salads and all that. And Merlot sort of goes with everything. It's not as specific as, I hate to say it, steak with cab, it's not. Merlot's way more friendly when it comes to food pairings and I had a bottle to. Oh, and that goes back to your point of like the color, because you know how wines go purple, red, brown, orange, and I can show you a wine I made 20 years ago that's Merlot from the same vineyard that's still red, so purple to red. I don't want our wines to go brown, orange, because then you get that crusty stuff here, and that crusty stuff, that's polymeric pigment that's falling out. That's the preservative of wine, and that's. For me, that's like, unless it was the year you got married, the birth of your first child or whatever, I get rid of it because that crusty stuff is making that wine go brown and orange. And for me, that's not good. People go, oh, you got to drink birth year wine. I'm like, no, I'm so damn old now. I don't want to drink a birth year wine. That wine's shot. I mean,
I have to say, I do keep buying, not birth year. I've only had one birth year wine ever. And it was a Bandol. I only had one, but I keep buying anniversary. I keep buying 1995, the year we were married, Bordeaux wines. And my husband is now like, well, I guess we're staying married for the rest of our lives because you've got too much of 1995 Bordeaux. I'm like, all right.
Well, California 95 was a great vintage too. So 96 was a really elegant wine. 97 was the very punchy wine. But 94 and 95, 94 was a really elegant wine. 95 though was really good vintage from California. I mean, the Simi from that year was fantastic. Like it was. It was a lot like this year actually, a little cooler and great hang time, and those wines will live for a long time. Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe I'll have to hook you up.
Broaden your horizons.
Yeah. So, but you did talk about this vintage, and I did want to talk about that in terms of overall and Merlot. You're picking Merlot now. You said, is this like in Paso? Everything is so delayed because of the cool weather we had in Paso. Is this normally when you're picking Merlot? Are you later than normal?
Well, there's the Chelsea Merlot we have not picked, and on average, I pick it today on. September 22 is really funny. So I think in the last 10 years, I've picked on September 22 probably 6 times. And I think I'm going to pick it on the 29th. So I'm 7 days.
A week.
Yeah, I'm a week behind.
But it is definitely.
Last year I picked it like August. I can't remember. I looked at the number a couple of days ago. August sometime, because last year was really,
you picked
really
it
hot.
early.
Oh yeah. 2022 was a really
brutal. Yeah.
Brutal. Yeah.
That was a long stretch of a hot weather.
It was started on Mother's Day and never stopped.
That's true. That's true.
At
That is
least we didn't
true.
have fires. We haven't had fires for a number of years, which is great.
Yeah. Knock on wood for that one, huh?
Yeah. Since
Um,
2020, yeah. In fact, we didn't
yeah.
make any 2020.
Neither did we.
It's funny that, like a lot of people
Good.
did.
You know
And when I
what?
go to,
Good for you. Good for you.
well, I go to the East Coast and people in California are like, shit, man, no one's going to drink Napa 2020s. I mean, but you go to the East Coast, they're all over there. People have
Oh,
forgotten. People have
yes.
forgotten
Yeah.
because they
Out
all
of
have
sight.
smoke.
Well, I will
No one
say,
picked before the fire. No one picked before the fire
yeah.
because it was the
Um,
complex
yeah.
fire, the glass fire.
Yeah, we chose not to do. We didn't do any 2020 either for our Reds. We were like, nope. But I will say on the East Coast, the news, because my parents, they were like, I was like taking pictures of the sky and all of that stuff, and they're like, well, what's that from? And I'm like, the fires. And they're like, oh, so like the news didn't make it. It was like a blip at the end of the news. Oh, there's a fire in California. Like they were not aware of here. So, and sure, if you're not living it, if you're not in the middle of it, they've already forgotten it here. They don't, whatever, they'll do it. But I have had some 2020s, and yeah, some people should not have made a 2020. But again, it's marketing. They're like, oh,
Especially
it
now,
tastes.
especially Napa because Napa was hit so early. Um, and I'm unfortunately because of my relationship with the Canadian industry, I know a lot about guaiacol, syringol, and creosol and how to take it out and
Oh,
how to
okay.
measure it. Measuring it is the big problem because we don't really have the ability to measure it here, even using some well-known labs here.
So away from fires, Merlot is one of the children of my beloved Cab Franc. Do we have to worry about pyrazines with
Merlot?
Merlot?
I don't know. It's really interesting. Like, why did they choose Merlot? I mean, Merlot is the one of the five Bordeaux's. It has the least pyrazines of them all. I mean, Cab Franc and Cabernet obviously have the two are the strongest. Um, Malbec, Malbec. There's a lot of confusion about Malbec.
Right.
True Malbec has a little bit, but Merlot certainly has a less. And Petit doesn't really have a lot of pyrazines.
Mm.
Not where we grow it, but Petit normally I like to make when I'm blending. If I'm using Petit, it's only ever 5 to 7% because
Yeah, a little
Petit
bit
can
goes a
be
long way.
yeah, it can be. It has a lot of personality, and that's why I was interested in your comment at the earlier and said, "Oh, I don't drink enough Petit," but there's a
It
reason.
has to be special. Yes, yes. Do you know what I say about Petite Syrah? It's phenomenal.
Petit
Like,
Verdot.
oh yeah, yeah, sorry. No, no, no. I'm sorry. Petite Syrah with
Oh,
Petite
okay.
Syrah, I love the idea of Petite Syrah. And then after the first glass, I feel like I just had like a Guinness beer. Like, it's it's like, okay, I'm done. It's tough to find a Petite Syrah. Like you were saying, you want to have that second or third glass. That's what Merlot is. You always want that
Right.
other glass. Petite Syrah, I always feel like, well, one glass is enough. Petite Verdot to me, I I love it and I wish I drank more of it. I like the velvety of it, but I like it as a single varietal sometimes. But I like what it does as a blend. I call it the warm and fuzzy blanket. When blended correctly, it adds, like, I like it with Cab Franc. Like it adds a warm fuzzy blanket to it that just adds a little bit more dimension and extends the finish. That's what I think Petit Verdot does.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it gives the structure.
Right,
Like,
right. Absolutely. So we are coming up to our hour, and I know you are a very, very busy man, so I don't want to keep you too long, but is there any, like, if you wanted to people to remember three things about Merlot, what would be three things that
well,
people should
firstly, of
remember
course,
about Merlot?
give it a go.
There you
It's pretty
go.
funny. This is 20 years since the Sideways movie. The anniversary is coming up. I think it's
Yep.
right now. But give Merlot a go, and then but don't buy a cheap one. I hate to say this. Don't buy a cheap Merlot. Buy something from Napa or Sonoma or Central Coast. But there's still some weaker Merlots out there, and then try to find them in a fresher style. not too loaded up with oak and not too loaded up with alcohol. You know, certainly if it says 15 alcohol, forget it. I'd be drinking them closer to 14.
14.
In fact, this year may be a good year that we can get them under 14, you know, back to where we should be, which is, I'm not saying we could get back to 12% alcohol, but we certainly should be getting in the 13s.
13s.
I think the consumers are going that way too, getting away from the big rich things. And then, just a bit, you know, pour it. What I like to do with Merlot is you pour it and you take it at sip immediately, but then, you know, keep a glass around until you finish the evening and then taste it again, because I think Merlot really expresses itself in the mouth with a little bit more air. And but you know, I'm not a big decanter. I just let it naturally do it. But yeah, give it a go. Let it it evolve.
That should be the new tagline. Merlot, give it a go.
There you go. Instead of Merlot, Merlot, give it a go.
Yeah.
Merlot, you can make a
Give
song.
it a go. Yeah. We should. I'm going to title this podcast, Merlot, give it a go. That's going to be the title of the podcast.
I like it.
So where can people, I mean, you have Fidelity, you have Chelsea, you have where are all those labels available on sale on your website? Do they have different websites? How can people get these Merlot and the Fidelity red wine and even that best, you know, wine of the week, Zinfandel?
Well, we sold that out on the same day it came out.
Of course. So forget that.
It's still out. It's still out there in the trade. I think
anybody who's watching, ha ha ha, I have
but
one.
The 2022 is really good too.
Okay.
But no, you can go on to Goldschmidt. I put my last name there on my handle there. You can go there, goldschmidtvineyards.com, and you'll be able to see all the wines there. To buy some of the other wines like Herald and some of the other Merlots, if you change my name to Wine and you do wine@goldschmidtvineyards.com, that will access those wines as well, because they're a sort of a separate portfolio. But I thought it was fun to try something that was a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you so much for coming on. And I know I have to tell everybody that they need to go to Instagram and follow you on Instagram, because you are very active on it. And it's not just, I'm going to call it's not just stupid stuff. You're in the vineyards and you're talking, which is so much of Instagram, just stupid stuff. But you're in the vineyard and you're pointing things out and you're showing things. And whenever I get the little notification that you're going live, I'm always clicking it. I don't care where I am. I'm always clicking it to see where it is. And, you know, if I can't, you know, like if I'm driving and I really can't pay attention, then I'll just know to go back to it later. But everybody should be following you on Instagram, because it is phenomenal to see you. And you travel, you know, you're in Chile or Argentina, wherever you are, you're always showing things in the vineyard. And so
that's
very educational. Yeah.
So you can follow me on Goldschmidt_vineyards. You can do that on Facebook and Instagram. And I try to post a video of where I am and what I'm seeing, especially on Instagram. Facebook, for some reason, the feed's not really working very easily at the moment. But yeah, Instagram for sure.
Yeah, and it is phenomenal to always see you in the vineyard and to hear what's going on and showing us what's going on. So thank you so much for coming on. I did save a little glass a little bit so I can raise it again and say slancha, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So good.
Sounds like after yesterday you needed that.
Yes. Oh God. And all day. Oh yes. Yeah. And let me tell you, the United Club needs to change their wine, because that was.
Well, they're going to.
Are they?
Yeah, they've brought back Doug Frost, who's the MS and MW, so he's
going
to be advising United again. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I know Doug. So kudos to that, because thank goodness, because that wine is not good.
I know. The wine on the plane right now, undrinkable.
Yes.
I hate to say it.
Yes. Yes. So kudos, Doug. Come on, change him up. Yeah. Way to go. So that's fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your Fidelity red wine, your Zinfandel, and your Harold Merlot. And I appreciate you taking time. We are going to get the word out. Merlot, give it a go. And, really fine. You need shirts for that. Tagline that right now, Nick. Tagline it. Send out whatever you got to do to get that copyrighted or whatever, because I see it on shirts. I see it. So, right. Bumper stickers, everything. Yeah. All right. You have a great day. Best of luck with the rest of your harvest, and thanks, I will talk to you soon.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Even in the Bible, water.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com and sign up for my newsletter at exploringthewineglass.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Podcast music is Wine by Kevins. Until next week, sláinte.
I want a nice glass right now. I'm on Kevins for my 10,000 tell you. There is always time for a good glass of wine. No, no, no. Oh, no, no, no. Never let you go. Oh, oh. No, no, no. Never let you go. Oh, oh. I want a nice glass right now.